This UTR Media production is sponsored by Between the Hills, the latest release by Eufaula.
Thanks for joining us. We are so excited to bring a conversation with one of the most respected names in Christian music, someone that's been writing, performing for well over 20 years. We're talking with none other than Sara Groves on today's show. We also have a special live performance from the main stage at Escape to the Lake from Sara. So hope you enjoy the conversation and the music.
I'm trying to work things out. I'm trying to comprehend. Am I the chance result?
Why music for you? You know, why music?
I don't know if I've ever been asked why music. Well, you know, a while back I kind of put my finger on the music. For me was very natural, I guess, in the way that I play. You know, Paul Simon says I'm an ordinary singer in the key of C. You know, in one of his songs he says I'm just an ordinary player in the key of C. And yet look what he's done with that. You know, like you're not very ordinary. So for me, the maybe compelling part is communication. You know, I am trying to sort my own life out. I'm trying to sort out what I see around me, and in that process of contemplation and of like coming back with something, making connections and all of that, music has always just been sort of it was the format, you know, of even from when I was really young. So yeah. The other day I was realizing that our piano right now is in the middle of the living room for the first time. I've always had a room in our house. Growing up, we had 3 bedrooms, and so the girls all shared one room, and then my mom and dad had their bedroom, and then we had a room for piano. And so there was something about that, like being able to close the door, not worry about if anyone's going to hear you. And I was able to go in there and, you know, just sort of like be that, you know, sing out and pretend and explore all those ideas and stuff. So for me, why music? I mean, maybe the stage was set for me to do that, but I was drawn to it like a moth to the flame very young, at a very young age. So it's been my mode of my outlet as long as I can remember.
Yeah. Now, there's just been so many changes in the music industry, almost too many to count, in just the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah.
And so, just from your perspective as a full-time songwriter and singer and performer, how are you navigating a lot of these changes?
You know, I think they didn't hit for me as early when I came out in, you know, as an independent artist. Started in 97, 98 was really when I began touring and things like that. I mean, we had cassette tapes of our first record, you know, so we had like barely a foot in this whole thing. Yeah. And then we've spanned a lot of change, and I feel like it hit a little bit later for me because my listeners tend to be coming along with me. They're my age. I was still buying CDs, you know, I was sort of abandoning that because I liked the physical. I liked being able to read the lyrics and things like that. But I feel like literally last year it was like, whoa, physical CDs. Yeah. Nope. Even my mom is streaming now. You know, even grandma is streaming. So grandma is streaming. And I am too. You know, I want to get the music. I don't want to have a bunch of CD cases and things like that always. So unless I'm giving a gift. So I think the impact hit me a little bit later than maybe with new artists coming out. I think what a landscape to be navigating. I see a lot of them doing immensely creative things like Jenny and Tyler. They're just like, I think they're, I don't know, they're just, they're having to be creative, you know? So that liminality, that space that is, you're in transition, you haven't made it yet to the new place, is really good for artists. So in one sense, it's been good for me. The sense that's been hard is that, well, for Troy and I, we felt like farmers who had been working a piece of land, you know, and making this much yield, and then we had to work more and more land to make that yield, and we basically just reached a point where we were just having to work so hard on the road to do what we'd kind of always done, or to, you know, sort of like be in the space. So our first response to it was to reorient our whole lives. We downsized by about 80%, you know, sold our suburban mini kingdom, and also it was all part of something I think that God was doing in our lives. So we ended up in the city when we bought it, it was 740 square feet. It's around 900 now with some renovations, but so we're in a small house, but we wanted to orient ourselves so we would be free to do what we felt called to do and not be just working for our stuff, you know. And so that was a step we took. But then I think the next piece has been, I think there's a switch happening again. Like, we're in a liminal space, and we've not quite landed where we're headed, but I think we're headed to a more what do you call it, when an artist, like James Joyce and old writers and things, they were patronized,
yeah.
and they had a patron who believed in what they were doing, and I think we're moving more and more, even through Kickstarter and things like that, we're moving to a patronage system where the people who want you to make music are going to help you make it. And so maybe the financial picture will be a little bit different than like more and more people buying a CD, you know, for this amount, and more people kind of like aligning themselves with an artist, saying like, hey, I want you to contemplate life for me, or not for me, but I do think some people are wired for contemplation. And years ago, Charlie Peacock told me, you're not a pastor, you're not a theologian, you're not a counselor, you're a contemplative. That's what you're doing. And so I think a lot of independent artists and artists in general are out sort of navel gazing and figuring things out. Maybe someone else isn't wired to do that, to like, or they'd like to, but they're not wired that way, you know, in the same way that I'm not good at any number of things that require more precision. And so that's sort of our role in the, you know, in the community, is to contemplate and then to bring. So I see for myself, I've seen, you know, what now marketers call your tribe, but that's good language for it. I felt from the very beginning, I felt like God said, you're not going to be the most well-known singer-songwriter in the world, but there are enough ears, and you will have ears that are tuned into what you're saying. You will be their songwriter. And the more I lean into that, the more further in my, you know, career I go. What a privilege, what an enormous honor to be, you know, and I'm as I am aging, and as the whole thing changes, and arc of career and all those types of things, I'm really finding the resiliency of that group, you know, that they are, it matters to them that I'm doing this. And I think for a while there, I was kind of lost and feeling like, does it, you know? So.
Okay, so coming back to, I think one of the most important questions I can ask is, how does the consumer become a patron?
Yes.
Because I think just from my perspective, I've seen three groups of people. There's the group of people that it's inherent. They know I should be doing this Kickstarter campaign and getting on board with this artist, and I should become a part of their tribe and help them make music for the future.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side of the spectrum of people that are just sort of never going to invest in that way. But there's this middle group of people, I don't know how large it is, but I think it's more sizable than we'd like to admit, that are willing to become patrons, willing to even adjust their consumer habits to benefit the artist, but they just don't even know where to begin or how to start. And I feel like we need to be having that conversation and helping guide them. So what are some ways that you think the average consumer can become more of a patron?
That's a great question, and I think that's kind of in this post-big box. We're moving into a post-big box era, right? Because the physical location and the internet, everything is it's all changing so quickly. So we went through this change where the main street, sort of collapses and big box is booming, and you have these huge stores, national stores. I think that arc of story relates to a lot of things, and it relates to books, it relates to music, definitely.
Yeah.
And I do think there is a learning curve to it, and that's why I feel like sometimes people want to go about it like maybe like, hey, this is my right, this is what you owe me, and I think there is some truth to like wanting to be paid for your work, like to not have it. So all the piracy talk and all that stuff, where when artists are coming out and kind of like chiding their audiences and stuff for like, hey, but so I understand that the desire to do that, to kind of say, wait a minute, like Taylor Swift says to Apple, I'm not handing out free iPods, or I don't ask you to do that, so why are you handing out my music? And she was leveraging her platform to do that, make that statement. But I think if we were to just kind of step back from that way of thinking and get more into a values conversation, the fact of the matter is that certain ways of streaming are paying artists and certain ways are not. So, Spotify is a big culprit of not paying artists. It's just not. They're not. This is exposed through like Pharrell showing his check for Happy for $2,000. If Pharrell is making $2,000 on Happy, you can imagine I'm getting like 37-cent checks.
Yeah.
And you've heard those stories before, Behind the Music, VH1.
Yeah.
Like, it's always the same story, like there was a lot of money, but I'm not sure where it went, and so, and a lot of times the artist isn't really wired to pay attention or to know exactly where that's going. So it is an interesting time where I think the way we think about, even like at my house, I used to buy all my posters from, I'd go to World Market or TJ Maxx, or I'd go buy a print or something, maybe have it framed. Well, now I'm seeking out local artists, and when something resonates with me, that's been a learning curve. So the first painting I bought was like $50, but last year I just bought a larger, it was a few $1,000s investment, but it was an artist that I have met and am building a relationship with, and this painting just completely resonated, met me right where I was. And so I think living into what we believe about art and like placing the same value, it's the same really lesson that we would have about like libraries or public radio or, a park. Like those things are kind of mandated by taxes that we participate in them. And you might feel like that's, that realm is misused or something, but you'd probably agree that it's good that we have a park, know? And so I think just people should examine what's bringing you life, what's helping, what songwriters are kind of, maybe playing a role in contemplation in your life and are playing a role in helping you think through and are helping you get to new thoughts and places you might not have been able to access. And if that's true, how are you playing a role in their ability to make music? Because they need your help, basically. And any idea, I remember people at church coming up to me, and like one very frank lady that always speaks, her mind or whatever, and she said, I just don't know are you starving or are you a millionaire?
Yeah, right.
I have no idea. And I loved that she asked me that, because I was able to say, I'm making a living. I'm making a living. And, without going into like, well, what does that mean? What do you make? And all that stuff. But I'm working hard and I'm making a living. And now with our change, downsizing and all that, again, was to orient to our new income. Income was definitely like it was shrinking and shrinking. My husband also he had to get a full-time job. We were both out on the road together. That's not ended up being a had to, it's a get to, because he moved into a role with IJM and it was time for him to do something new. He wanted to do something new. So in God's grace, that all, has been a really good, like the pressure cooker of it all brought us to good places. But the reality is artists that you love, if they're not Taylor Swift, there are very few people who are
making it
We're-
big time.
We're like, your support doesn't matter.
Right.
Or yeah, and I understand, I'm not anti-streaming. I mean, again, that's where we're going. My mom is streaming, my, grandparents are streaming music. So I'm not anti, I just think we have to rethink then our approach to the arts, which has always never been a money-making endeavor. The arts have always been endowed for a reason. But I think the individual consumer needs to think about how they are participating in endowment. And instead of thinking of value of like, was this CD worth $7 or $10? I would say maybe step back and think of a few artists that you really believe in, and maybe with them take that number even up from there, and think of it more as a community participating and helping that person do what they're doing.
This UTR Media production is sponsored by the latest release by Eufaula. Between the Hills by Eufaula was reviewed by Jesus Freak Hideout as a terrific album with gorgeous melodies. Between the Hills is available now at iTunes, Amazon, and eufaulamusic.com.
I think that you were mentioning endowment and that kind of idea, and I feel like not that long ago, 5-10 years ago, participating in the purchasing of music was to the consumer feeling like they were participating in that, the future creation of that art and the support of that artist. And with all the changes in the way people consume music, I think it is hard for people to figure out how to shift, because now they're cherry picking downloads, or they are not downloading at all. They're just using Spotify or Apple Music or something, and it's hard to shift from that mindset of my purchase once was supporting an artist, and now the artist is getting pennies for my participation. I need to do more. And I think the responsibility of that also lies on the companies kind of doing the right thing. Right now it is the Wild West, and there isn't any regulation, just like radio. When radio first came out and first began playing, like 1940s, 1950s, we see a change in the way that artists are, like, how do you do that? How do you do that in a way that isn't just sort of where, like, if people are, because people are still paying for music, they're paying a subscription, or they're paying something, and it's not, I'm not saying that that's not enough necessarily, but on the other end, the resources are being pooled differently, so that it's just one of those seasons where there needs to be some legislation to regulate streaming, for instance. Apple is regulating themselves pretty well. Pandora pretty well. Spotify is notoriously not great, and they are huge, So, but that doesn't have anything to do with the consumer. That has a lot to do with Spotify, and that there are no one's holding them accountable to say, okay, your royalties need to reflect kind of what radio was, or what radio is. So, and those laws are in the works, and those won't affect consumers, I don't think. I think that that's just a little bit more fiscal responsibility on behalf of those companies. But even you're talking about independent artists, the emphasis has been on road, on like live concerts, and that is where most of my friends in music are making their living. But that does have its toll. It takes a toll, live, and meeting with people live is amazing, and it'll never get old. It's just a beautiful thing to be somewhere in Ohio and have, a few hundred people come out and share a night
and get to like think about things, talk through things, you know, and share what's on your heart. But yeah, but when you're having to turn that into like a system, or that's becoming, you know, just the wear and tear of that can be. So just, I think also get to know those artists. I think it's just an invitation. Artists are opening up more personally through all the social media. They are really making themselves accessible in new ways outside of just road time and, you know, these other things. So I think, like, I would just encourage people to get to know a smaller group of artists. Like, sure, listen to a broad range of things, but get to know a small group of artists that you are sort of, just like you might cultivate the art in your home, or start supporting local artists as you find them, you know, and are moved by what they're doing. Find some artists that you really resonate with and get to know them and see them as people, you know, and not just as maybe that end product.
Okay, one last question for you. Kind of a change in direction a little bit, but as you think about folks in the artist community, either kind of just getting their career started, or they're establishing their tribe, what are, you know, key things that you have learned, or things you would pass on to artists that are, you know, wanting to grow in their craft or just grow in their career?
Yeah. I look at younger artists coming up right now, and I think it is a difficult space to engage with at one level, and then at another level there's all this other things that are accessible to you that never were. And I think still my advice probably hasn't changed in, you know, I've been out on the road 18 years, 19 years, something like that. And I remember, you know, my first set of events, Trout asked me a couple of years ago, he said, what kept us going when no one was asking for it, you know, no one was clamoring to hear from us, but we kept going through some pretty, like, you know, you're playing and people are talking, or you're playing, I remember playing at a coffee shop and there was a game of, like, not Monopoly, someone was playing, a group playing a game right down on the stage, you know, and they're there, I'm here, and I'm playing and trying to figure out that, you know, like, okay, I feel pretty kind of vulnerable, but I'm not sure how to, you know, I don't want to, like, hey, everybody, you know, listen to me. So figuring out who you are and what spaces, like, suit you, you know, like I did a junior high lock-in and figured out, oh, okay, that's not where I thrive, you know, that's not where I'm not Skrillex, you know, whatever. So kind of like figuring out what fits you, and that's not bad, you know, if that thing doesn't fit you, but also then, playing wherever you are, as if, you know, the Queen of England or whatever, just being consistently, I think that's the only thing you can throw the seed in the ground. You can't make it rain. You can't make stuff grow. Yeah. So I think the seed is just showing up and being, you know, giving your best. I remember being booked for, very early on, I was booked for an event, and I came to the location and I knew it was something to do with people with disabilities, but I wasn't sure what exactly. What was predominantly people that were either in, half the group had no hearing, and the other half had no real, like, cognitive engagement, you know, they were catatonic, or, you know, and so when I got there, I had like practiced, and you know, and I had a little band with me or whatever, and then so the piano's complete, it's an upright, completely out of tune, nothing is going like I think, and I'm realizing it was a surprise to me that the audience basically would not be able to receive in some way. That was my perception, what we were going to do. And I think those are the moments when you think, you know, you just make a decision to, like, this is going to be like the best, I'm just going to, like, play my heart out. And I just remember at that event, so many little things coming from it that were at the end of the night where you're just completely humbled at, how beautiful engaging with any human heart can be, and how it's so worth it to never despise or to look down on where, what you're doing and where you are. If you're called to do music, which I felt called to do it, and do it well, and do it wherever, and let that other stuff, that's the Lord's work, I think. The other part of like those chants, there happens to be a record label in the audience tonight, in this concert in Bloomington, Minnesota, Those kinds of parts of the story I had no control over.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Awesome.
Have you listed all the times you've tried? Do you call on all your alibis? When somebody asks the question, why are you hiding? Did you feel a pull? Did you hear a call? Did you take a chance and lose it all? Do you fear there's no collateral left for trying? Friend, I know your heart is raw, but love is still a worthy cause. Picking up and pressing on, love is still a worthy cause. In the midst of passing bravery, and in the face of your own injury, is the constant generosity of grace. It's the beauty and the tales we tell. It's in pressing on and landing well, and the joy that comes when we give ourselves away. And friend, I know your heart is raw, but love is still a worthy cause. Picking up and pressing on, love is still a worthy cause. I love because you loved me when I had nothing, when I had nothing. I love because you loved me when I had nothing, when I had nothing. It's the beauty and the tales we tell. It's in pressing on and landing well, and the joy that comes when we give ourselves away. So friend, I know your heart is raw, but love is still a worthy cause. Picking up and pressing on, love is still a worthy cause. Friend, I know your heart is raw, but love is still a worthy cause. Picking up and pressing on, love is still a worthy cause.
Oh, I was gonna hug your neck. Thank you.